You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Hello, it's episode 238 of the podcast. Adrian here, and I'm joined by Renaud.
Hi, Adrian, and hi, everybody.
Hi. Exciting times, actually. We're at the start of October. We'll just about be in the trade fair when this episode is live, and the Global Sources Trade Fair that myself and Kate mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Consumer Electronics Phase in Hong Kong Expo. And you're going to be speaking as well about quite an interesting topic at this particular expo, right?
Yeah, they expressed interest. I spoke a few times before there.
Yes.
Sometimes it's more for, let's say, new buyers. And so it was topics like, hey, the quality control tools and, some, the right approach to develop a new product and things like that. And this time they wanted to have something about artificial intelligence. And so I'm going to be speaking about the way artificial intelligence is used in the design and manufacturing of new products. So let's see. I'm still doing a bit of research about that and, pulling from the team's brains, because different people in the team have been using AI in different ways. And yeah, there's some clear use cases, let's say, but also some clear limitations.
So that's Saturday the 12th you'll be speaking. So if you are in Hong Kong, do come along. You can meet the team. Even me, if you want to put a face to the name, and Renaud as well. We're all going to be there. So yeah, absolutely. I'm making my way over soon, and I'll be there. So that's going to be good. So yeah, hope to see the listeners there. There's still time to get your tickets and get over to Hong Kong, and that starts on the 11th. So this week we're going to be talking about the bill of materials. And we have discussed this on the podcast, but 4 years ago. So I think it's time to refresh the memories and go over the BOM, why it's important, why you need to know what's in it, and, some of the best practices around creating them, storing them, maybe some of the concerns that people might have about it as well, or should have about it. So the obvious place to begin is just introducing what is the BOM when we're talking about a BOM.
It is a key document that includes a lot of very important information. It is basically where the supply chain information comes together with the product design information, right? So think about it this way. It is, in the simplest way, it is the list of parts or, components that make up the product. And everything that really ends up in the product has to be listed in the bill of materials. So that includes also packaging elements, whatever, labeling stickers and things like that. Certain things that are essential to making the product, such as, an assembly fixture or a testing jig or something like that, does not go into the BOM because it does not end up in the product. Basically, the idea is that purchasing people need to know what to purchase, right? Planning people need to make sure, okay, is everything in store, like in the warehouse? So can we do an assembly job, let's say, right? Or, we're still missing that one thing, and so we cannot make the product at all, right? So you need to list everything. The people who do the costing, obviously, they need to know, okay, what's the total price, right? So the BOM will show, hey, for 1 unit of final product, we need to buy 4 screws, and we need to buy 4 feet in rubber, and we need to buy 1 piece of battery and 1 piece of display, etc., etc. Okay, so that's for purchasing people, costing people, planning people. The people who prepare the manufacturing, let's say the process engineers, they look at the BOM to see, okay, so what's what's exactly the kinds of parts that are going to be used, because this also has to be specified on the work instructions for the manufacturing activity.
Mm.
And of course, the design engineers look at it, they work on it, they keep, adding to it together with the sourcing people, right? And they cannot say that the design is finished if they cannot show the BOM, right? Because, that's the way it's going to look like, but I don't even know what components go into it. I don't know anything basically, right? It is a very fundamental, very basic document. Again, it is supply chain information coming together with product design information.
Mm. And this sounds like something that you might be doing quite early in your project, but actually the BOM kind of evolves throughout, and it is something that affects different departments and has different stakeholders, as you've mentioned. But it's, if we talk about the early stages, I mean, you've got your concept, you've got your drawings, you've got your list of requirements. These are critical parts of the early stage of your project of making a new product. But the BOM is right in there as well in importance.
Oh yeah. Well, there are different types of BOM as it evolves, right? So at the beginning, it's typically in Excel because it's very fluid. And what is really important is what are the critical components that will make up the product. Okay. So maybe the product it's got to have an enclosure. Okay. So maybe there's going to be a top and a bottom. And then what else is going to be there? As I said before, maybe there's going to be a battery and there's going to be a little motor and there's going to be a pump, blah, 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 right? So what are the critical components? These big components, important components, expensive components, right? And you start to look into them, and that's part of the design phase. Toward the beginning, you really need to clarify, hey, like what kind of a pump are we going to use, right? For example, and maybe we should already talk to a few suppliers, right, to confirm what their pumps can do, because we have specific requirements for the product performance. Okay. And that's where ideally you will also include some other people who will see that as very important for them later on. Quality people are going to look at it and say, wait. How are we going to test the performance of the pump, etc.? But also this supplier, how to make sure that they're going to deliver good pumps. Like, we don't want 10% defectives because that's going to throw everything away into a big mess, right? So they're going to look at the supplier's ability and capacity to deliver the right type of pump at the right quality level, in the right quantity, etc., etc. Maybe reliability people are going to look at it and say, well, that's the performance requirement for reliability. Can it take that kind of stress? Can it go through that many cycles, for example, and fail in very low proportion, etc., etc., right? Purchasing people are going to look at it and say, well, is this supplier even a proper supplier? Can we get them to sign our contract, agree on our terms and conditions, and etc., payment terms, and so on and so forth. So it's not just the designer working on its own or a sourcing person working on its own. Usually,
right,
there are other considerations. So you start to make a list of these components, and maybe you say, well, we might buy from this supplier or that supplier, it's not really sure, etc. And here's a rough indication of pricing. Okay, pricing, maybe size, weight, because you want to look at it holistically after that and say, okay, I just have maybe 20% of the components, but these are the really important ones. Also, should mention also, it's not just quality, reliability, it's also compliance. Yeah. Depending on the type of product, you want to look at it and say, wait. is this a pre-certified part, for example, right? Or does it come with certain compliance risks? Is it going to be a safety critical component? Then how to make sure that we work with a low risk source, right? And what we see is that a lot of companies, the way they do is they skip all these things when they go into prototyping, etc. And then it's kind of too late when you are in advanced prototyping stage and there's the pressure from, sales and, customers, investors. Everybody's like, hey, you got to deliver soon, can you deliver it next month? You don't want to go back and pick some other suppliers and redo the testing and so on, right? So you go into production with something and then you see that you run into issues. Very typical. Okay. So that's why ideally you involve different people to look at the BOM, and that's already part of the design review early on. Okay. That's, let's say, the early iteration of the BOM. And maybe the salespeople will say, well, I can't sell the product for more than $25. So, the landed cost of one unit of the product cannot be more than X, where maybe $7 or something like that. So we're already at $10 just with the critical components. There's a problem here. Stop and go back. We got to pick some cheaper components, or we got to simplify the product, or we got to do something like that, right? That's typical. So the early BOM is very important for all these things. Then as you move along and the people in doing the engineering design go more into the details of the design, they will pick more and more components. Maybe at the beginning for the electronics, they pick the chips, maybe the MCUs or MPUs, and then over time they build around that, right? They're going to pick some other electronic components, and some of them that are pretty standard passive components. They're really not critical typically, but like everything has to be listed. Okay. So on the mechanical side, let's say they pick some standard off the shelf components, but then they also need to custom design some parts. Well, then they have to refer to their drawings in the BOM, and they need to put some of the information there. Okay. Then, as I mentioned, it goes through design reviews. There should be a structured design review at several stages in the new product development cycle. Then, let's say just before manufacturing, you need to have something all ready to go, right? And what's really important at that stage is where all the risks, analyzed and validated. Have we made the tooling for everything that needs tooling? These types of questions. And then you go into manufacturing. And typically by that stage, when you start to do purchasing for the pre-production pilot runs and mass production, typically it's no longer in an Excel file. It is typically in the ERP system. Okay. Most manufacturing companies can have to use an ERP system because there's so much complexity in the business. And that's a way to prevent any unauthorized changes typically. All right. Before that in Excel, well, it's just like other design files. It has to be version controlled. One person's got to be responsible for it at any stage in the process. Maybe not the same person all along, but typically it's good practice to have one person responsible for it and who will really pay attention to it before the design reviews and take it very seriously, etc., etc. Okay. And well, that I guess answer your question, right? It evolves over time. It is managed differently in different formats over time, and more details get added to it until the point where it's confirmed as manufacturing ready.
Yeah, yeah. And this is not something that you just do in isolation. If you are the entrepreneur or the business that's bringing the product to market, probably if you're going to be working with a manufacturer, let's say in China, they are quite possibly going to be involved partly in the creation of the bomb, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, it's a team effort, right? Some company, let's say a big company like Apple, right? Remember, they have like 10,000 people
Yeah.
in on the ground in China and Vietnam. So and now more and more in India also.
Mm.
So they do all that for sure. Now, do they
Yep.
keep their contract manufacturer in the loop? Yeah, because the contract manufacturer is going to make some of the custom parts themselves. Okay. And they get to review. They're requested to review and do their risk analysis and suggestions, etc. But they're not driving it, right? They're just sort of informed and, a part of it, okay, but they're not driving it. The Apple people are driving it
Mm-hmm.
because they have all the competencies they need, in their own teams. Now, the typical relatively small company that's going to work with a factory in China, it depends on the development model, right?
Mm.
If they pick an existing product and they say, well, make it in that color and then maybe change the packaging like that and put my logo and things like that. It's OD, original design manufacturing. Usually they call it in China. And basically the customer is just a distributor and does not have access to the bill of material. I mean, 99 times out of 100, they do not have access to the information. Okay. They just buy it. It's a finished product. That's it. Go ahead. Right. And for some consumer products, that might be okay, depending on where they sell. If they sell in the European Union now, with the general product safety regulation and the other directives and regulations for various products, they have to have, there's got to be a technical folder, let's say it this way, a technical file that includes the bill of material and some other things, usually a very simplified bill of material. And if the importer trusts the manufacturer and accepts that they take responsibility, but they don't have access to the BOM, they can work with a company like a TUV or a BV or Intertech and so on, so that that big company reviews the information that is in the manufacturer's hands and confirms that all is there. And, that's fine until maybe they get controlled by the market surveillance authorities that request certain documents. And then maybe the manufacturer says to the importer, no, sorry, I cannot send it to you. Like, I don't care. Sorry. That's my information. Right. And so that can be a problem. And that's for very general consumer goods, not highly regulated. When you go into, for example, medical devices, there's no way you can buy something, put it on the market without having the bill of material and all the design files. Like that, that's not going to work now. Okay. So it very much depends on the model, the development model. If you do the opposite of what I mentioned and you develop the products from scratch and maybe you assemble a team of designers and a project manager working on the supply chain side to pick the components, etc., then you involve a contract manufacturer. The contract manufacturer is going to do some of the sourcing because they have their own approved suppliers that they're more comfortable working with, and they might have better pricing, better payment terms, and so on. So, and more control over them, right? So it makes sense to let them pick some of the suppliers, and they're going to do the purchasing of the parts. So they have to get their hands on the bill of material and work on it and put it in their ERP system and so on and so forth, right? So there's sort of a handoff of information to the contract manufacturer. Now, depending on how the contract has been negotiated and how it's written, what I always recommend is that the importer gets a contract that says that the bill of material will be open. It would be an open BOM relationship where the importer knows exactly where each component is purchased, for how much, what is the lead time, what is the MOQ, what's the price, etc. Who is the supplier? What's the contact information of the supplier? Can we contact the supplier directly? That's got to be a yes. Now, involving the contract manufacturer, because contract manufacturer is the customer of the components, so you don't want to short circuit that. You can create some other problems. But you should be able to reach out to them and maybe, pay them a visit if that makes sense and so on. Okay. Open BOM. Open BOM is really what you should aim for generally if you invest in the product development, just to make sure it's your product. If you do not have the bill of material, the full bill of material, including the price and the supplier, company name, etc., it's not your product.
Yeah, where's your control?
Switch it.
Yeah, where's your control?
Yeah, and if you want to switch from this manufacturer to another manufacturer, let's say you've done all the design, okay, all the mechanical design, maybe electronic design, it's maybe the firmware, etc. Maybe you have all that, but the problem is you're buying that metal piece that really needs to look very nice. And they struggled for a while to get the nice plating to look exactly as you like. And you're going to move that project to another manufacturer, but you don't know where that metal part comes from and where it's plated. It might take you 6 months to get the supply chain just because of that one element that's missing. It might take you 6 months to get back up and running, right? And maybe it would be impossible for you to get exactly the same finish on that part. And that's just one example. But that kind of things can really derail a project. And it can mean that you are sort of forced to keep working with that manufacturer, even if they have serious quality issues, even if they have long delivery delays, even if they raise the price just because they can, right? Yeah. For no reason. So it's not really your product if you don't own both the design files, etc., in a native format, and also the bill of material with all of the information that you should have access to.
Yes, yeah, that's a good warning there and a good point. I suppose this leads on quite neatly then to some of the common concerns that we might have about the BOM. Not having access to it, you've kind of addressed that, because if you don't have access, you don't have control, and you don't really know what the supplier's doing, or maybe what they're hiding. You mentioned prices. I mean, one of the points that sort of springs to my mind will be they're charging you X amount, but you've got no way to actually confirm whether those prices that they are charging you are correct, because you're not seeing the BOM. So you can't double check, for example.
Oh, yeah. No, totally. Basically, you have to guess. And that's what most manufacturers in China and in a lot of other places, that's what they want. Because if you work with an open BOM, you know how much they are taking for their margin, and which is not profit, right? We're talking about margin here. And the thing with most manufacturers in China is that they would charge you a price based on based on what they think you can pay, right? Oh, this big company, blah blah blah. Oh, I see the way they sell their products is not cheap. I'm gonna make a good healthy margin, then let's see if they push back. They push back, so I reduce just a little bit, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's it. I have a good margin. I really don't want them to know that I'm making that whatever, a 50% margin or something. I really don't want them to see that. Okay. There's also another reason, and it's that they kind of think that, hey, I'm making this product and I'm making it the way I want, right? And if I see, okay, that component supplier is causing me some problems, or maybe I find another one that's cheaper, I'm just going to change to another source. I don't need to tell the customer, right? I'm just going to buy it.
They'll never know.
Right. They never know. Yeah, right. I'm just going to pick that other one. Maybe it's cheaper, maybe whatever. Maybe it's better, right? Who knows? And then maybe we should not have that in steel. Maybe we should have it in brass, I'm going to make that decision myself. I'm just going to change things in the way I purchase it, and I don't need to tell the customer. They're not going to see it anyway. It's somewhere inside, whatever, right? And that's how you get some serious reliability issues. And sometimes quality issues, like, the product doesn't work properly right out of the box. And you're thinking, what happens? How come, right? Or more commonly, reliability issues. Oh, they changed, I don't know, they changed to a different motor. Oh, it is rated differently. And then I use the product, and after a couple of minutes, it goes up, sort of maybe even in flames, right? So that's a safety issue also. Or, I don't know, I changed the gears. Oh, I'm going to make them in a cheaper kind of plastic. And then suddenly, after, I don't know, let's say it's a toy that has some wheels and is propelled forward with the wheels that are actioned by some gears. Well, after 20 hours of getting the wheels to turn, suddenly, clock, 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 clock. And you open up and the gears have been completely flattened. Like it doesn't grasp, anymore. The mechanism no longer works. Well, they saved a little bit of money, and the toy is basically good for the trash, right? If you have solid control over the BOM and you have a proper contract with the manufacturer, they'll be more careful, because you can go after them. After that, you can say, well, I see what you did. I see what you changed. But this is the BOM that we agreed on. And the contract says that if you change anything, you're liable for the impact of that. So, here's the bill.
Yep.
And you get to reproduce for free.
Do you think do you think there's also a case where maybe people who are sourcing, for your manufacturer, they might be given, under the table payment or something by a certain supplier to choose their components instead? I guess this isn't one of the key instances, but it could happen.
Oh, in, let's say, the not very well managed manufacturers, that's very, very typical.
Okay.
A lot of the SMEs in the manufacturing sector is in China, and that's still the case in 2024. It's crazy. So when you look at it, you say, oh, yeah, we have an ERP. And you look at it, and it's an ERP like King D or something like that for accounting. And maybe they follow up on, the inventory and the sales and a little bit of the purchasing, maybe, and that's it. And you're like, then how do you know how to purchase? Oh, the purchasing people, they have everything in Excel. Okay. And they totally resist. They say that the ERP is not a good fit for them or something. Aha. Why is that? Because they don't even want their boss to know, where they buy these components and for how much, because then it's too easy to double check the price. And so what happens is that from time to time, maybe they get tipped by the supplier, hey, your purchaser, they're asking for money, blah, 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 you should look into it. Or maybe from time to time they pick a piece, and often the most money is made on these small pieces that are really not essential to the product design and are usually not discussed very much. Like screws, for example. They would buy screws that are 4 times the normal price. How come? Well, the supplier only gets the 1 time, and then 3 times goes to the purchaser's private account or something, right? And that's how you see purchasers who drive around in BMW and boast about their 3 apartments that they bought over the past 5 years, So it is still an issue in 2024. It's crazy. Is it getting better? Probably, but it's still an issue. It's crazy. That's why if you don't see that they are managing purchasing, all of purchasing in their ERP, is like, whoa, really, right? If you see that they're not managing material control and production control in their ERP, is like, well, then how are they doing? Can they show me a good system? Yeah, they cannot show me that they have a system approach that really helps them see, any issue that might delay production. Then basically they don't have a system. And it's going to be, oh, good surprise, they ship on time. Oh, unpleasant surprise, they are 3 weeks late. And they told me like 3 days before they were supposed to ship. It's crazy, but it still happens.
Okay.
So,
so it's,
that was just a side note about a lot of very poorly managed small and medium manufacturers in China. Bigger manufacturers at one point, they kind of have to grasp that, but they can suffer a lot of issues also, of course.
No, very relevant. It's a good point. And it's sort of, we're crossing over from the BOM to due diligence as well. So definitely some important things to consider there. I think my last point on concerns about the BOM would be confidentiality of your IP, because as you've already mentioned at the start, this document or spreadsheet or whatever form it takes, this is a living thing. It's going to give everybody everything that they need to produce your product exactly as it is meant to be produced. So obviously we don't want that getting into the wrong hands, but could there be a risk of that?
Well, usually both the manufacturers and the importers treat it as a very highly confidential document.
Sure.
So it doesn't go around very much. And you can look on the big companies' websites. Very few of them will give you the list of their suppliers. I think H&M was a pioneer in that. You can look on their website for the cut and sew factories and the dyeing houses and things like that. Okay. It's still a highly polluting company with fast fashion is just by its nature, not the kind of company that we need around, let's say, in the 21st century.
Yeah.
But at least in terms of transparency of supply chain, they are quite good. Apple also publishes the list of its suppliers and there's some others, right? And you can just look at some teardowns of some famous products, right? So every Apple product has been torn down by various companies, and there's a lot of videos on YouTube, some whatever, Amazon products, Microsoft products, etc. People tear them down and look at the markings on the components, etc. And they say, well, this comes from, this is the Snapdragon from Qualcomm, and this is this, and this is that. Okay. There's a lot of information out there about these big brands, but what we see is that sometimes, for example, for electronics, what microcontroller was used in itself is nearly as secretive as the source code of the firmware. So when you start to buy electronic components in a certain volume, you can request from the supplier that they not put certain markings, for example, right? So that when someone opens a product, they cannot just read the marking and know what model of MCU it is and where it comes from, etc. If you can't do that, what we've done in some cases is actually just grind the markings off of the component. Sometimes it's better not to do that because you might affect, quality or reliability of the product. But in some cases, it's perfectly appropriate. And then it's much harder. It becomes much harder to reverse engineer the product. There's some other things. Some people put some kind of putting on the board, and it's not fit-proof. Anyway, I think we should just link to the long page that we have written about strategies for protection of intellectual property, because there's so much to this. It's really a deep topic.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Yes. Well, there are a number of resources about the BOM and the IP protection that you've just mentioned that I'll be linking to in the show notes. But I mean, that's been a great coverage of the BOM and why it's such an important document. I mean, compared to some, maybe it's not one that you immediately think of, compared to your product drawings and things like that when you're developing, say, a new product. But based on what we've just discussed, actually really important. So yeah, one to think about and a good reminder for everybody listening. So I think we can round it out there, Renaud. And yeah, I'll finish by saying, if you do come to Hong Kong and you do come to meet us, we got a booth at the actual trade fair. I'll leave the link to that in the show notes also, so you know which trade fair. We'll be pleased to meet you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.